Sweet Springs, Wyoming Territory, 1889. Lucas Lawton never planned on becoming sheriff of Sweet Springs. At 24, he figured himself too young, too restless for the responsibility. But when outlaws gunned down old Sheriff Timmons last winter, the town council had practically begged him to pin on the badge. Now, standing at his office window watching the gathering storm clouds, Lucas wondered if he'd made a mistake. The High Plains were no place for putting down roots, especially for a man wearing a tin star. Men in his position died young out here, and they died alone. No sense getting attached to anything, or anyone, he muttered, adjusting his Stetson as he prepared for evening rounds. The philosophy had served him well these past 3 years since leaving his family's failed ranch in Kansas. The frontier demanded vigilance, not vulnerability. Love was a luxury that got men killed. He'd seen it happen too many times. Husbands leaving themselves open to ambush while protecting wives and children, families starving because sentiment clouded judgment. No, Lucas had it figured. The West was for men who understood that survival came first. Sweet Springs might be growing. A proper bank, 3 saloons, even a schoolhouse now. But civilization was just a thin veneer over wilderness. The tin star on his chest reminded him daily that order came at a price, usually paid in blood. Lightning cracked across the darkening sky as Lucas stepped onto the boardwalk. Wind gusted down Main Street, sending tumbleweeds scattering and shopkeepers hurrying to secure awnings. It would be a bad one. April storms in Wyoming could turn deadly without warning. "Sheriff," called Arnold from the general store. "Better wrap up those rounds quick. This one's coming in fierce." Lucas nodded, quickening his pace. The streets were emptying as townsfolk sought shelter. He'd just check the bank, then the livery, and head back to the jailhouse where a pot of coffee and stack of wanted posters awaited him. 24 years old and already settled into the routine of a man twice his age. Sometimes he wondered if this was all life had in store for him. Lonely nights in a drafty jail, facing down drunks and thieves until one day his luck ran out. The first fat raindrops began to fall as Lucas reached the bank. All secure. He turned toward the livery when movement at the edge of town caught his eye. A wagon, struggling through the mud. A lone figure at the reins fighting to control the horses as the storm intensified. "Damn fool," Lucas muttered, jogging toward the approaching wagon. "Who travels in weather like this?" The horses reared as another lightning bolt split the sky. The wagon lurched dangerously to one side, and Lucas broke into a run. By the time he reached the struggling team, rain was coming down in sheets. He grabbed the bridle of the lead horse, speaking low and steady until the animal calmed. "Whoa there, easy now." Only then did he look up at the driver, expecting to find some grizzled traveler or foolhardy tradesman. Instead, he found himself staring into the most striking pair of blue eyes he'd ever seen. "Thank you," she said, voice barely audible above the storm. "I thought we were finished." She couldn't have been more than 20 years old, her honey-blonde hair plastered to her face by the rain. Despite her sodden appearance, Lucas could see she was beautiful, with delicate features and a determined set to her jaw. "You shouldn't be out in this," he said, harsher than he'd intended. "Where are you headed?" "Sweet Springs. I have a letter for Mr. Holbrook at the bank." Another crack of thunder, and the horses stamped nervously. "Bank's closed. Everyone with sense is indoors." Lucas glanced at the sky. "We need to get off the street. Livery's just down the way. We can stable your horses there." She nodded, and Lucas led the team down the muddy street. By the time they reached the livery, water was coursing through the streets like a river. Old Pete, the stable master, helped them unhitch the horses. "Got quite the flood starting out there," Pete observed. "Young lady, you picked a bad day for traveling." "I didn't anticipate this storm," she replied, wringing water from her skirts. "Is there a hotel nearby?" "Carlson's place is full up with the cattle buyers in town," Pete said. "Might try Mrs. Halloway's boarding house, though it's clear across town." Lucas frowned. The woman was shivering now, her lips taking on a bluish tinge. The boarding house was a good half-mile away, through streets rapidly becoming dangerous. "My office is just down the block," he said reluctantly. "You can wait out the worst of it there." She studied him for the first time, noting the badge on his chest. "You're the sheriff?" "Lucas Lawton," he confirmed. "And you are?" "Olivia Walker," she said, extending a slender hand. "Pleased to make your acquaintance, Sheriff, despite the circumstances." Her grip was firmer than he expected, and something about the touch sent an odd jolt through him. He dropped her hand quickly, blaming the sensation on the electricity in the storm air. "We should hurry," he said gruffly. "Pete, the lady's wagon. I'll see to it, Sheriff. Don't you worry." Lucas helped Olivia gather her carpet bag from the wagon, then led her through the deluge to the jailhouse. By the time they stumbled inside, they were both drenched to the bone. "There's a stove in the back," Lucas said, shaking water from his hat. "And I keep spare blankets in the cabinet." The jailhouse was modest, a small front office with a desk and 2 chairs, a pot-bellied stove in the corner, and 3 cells in the back, currently empty. Lucas stoked the fire while Olivia stood dripping on the plank floor. "I'm afraid I'm making quite a mess," she said. Lucas shrugged. "Floor's seen worse." He fetched a rough wool blanket from the cabinet and handed it to her. "You should get out of those wet clothes. I've got a spare shirt you can borrow while yours dries." A hint of color touched her cheeks. "I couldn't possibly. It's that or catch your death," Lucas said flatly. "I'll step outside while you change." "In this downpour? Don't be ridiculous." She glanced at the cells. "I'll change in there, if you don't mind." Lucas nodded stiffly and retrieved a clean blue shirt from his private quarters attached to the office. He handed it to her without meeting her eyes, then busied himself with brewing coffee while she changed in the furthest cell. When she emerged minutes later, Lucas nearly dropped the coffee pot. His shirt hung to her knees, the sleeves rolled up several times, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders as it began to dry in the stove's heat. She'd spread her dress and petticoats over the cell door to dry. "Much better," she said, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders and sitting in the chair he indicated. "I'm grateful for your hospitality, Sheriff." Lucas poured coffee into 2 tin cups, his mind racing. There was something familiar about her, something he couldn't place. Had she passed through Sweet Springs before? "What brings you to our town, Miss Walker?" "Business for my uncle," she replied, accepting the coffee. "He's a lawyer in Cheyenne. I'm delivering documents regarding a property sale. Long way to travel alone. I'm accustomed to looking after myself." A small smile played at her lips. "Though I confess, the storm caught me by surprise." Lucas studied her as she sipped her coffee. Something about her face triggered a memory he couldn't quite grasp. "Have we met before?" She tilted her head, considering him. "I don't believe so. I would remember meeting Sweet Springs' handsome young sheriff." The compliment made him uncomfortable. He wasn't used to such direct comments from a young lady, particularly one as refined as she appeared to be. "Well, you're welcome to wait here until the storm passes," he said, moving to his desk to establish some distance. "Though from the sound of it, that might not be until morning." "I hate to impose." "It's no imposition," he cut in, surprised to find he meant it. "My duty is to keep folks safe." Outside, the storm intensified, rain hammering against the windows. Lucas found himself stealing glances at his unexpected guest. There was a quiet dignity about her, a self-possession unusual in someone so young. He guessed she was no more than 20, but her eyes held a wisdom beyond her years. As the evening wore on, they fell into easy conversation. Olivia told him about growing up in Boston, how her parents had died of influenza when she was 16, and how her uncle had brought her west. "He thought the mountain air would be good for my constitution," she explained. "I was quite fragile after losing them." "And was it? Good for you, I mean." She smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. "It was. The West has a way of strengthening a person, don't you think? You either adapt or you perish." Lucas nodded, thinking of his own journey west after his family lost everything. "That's certainly true. And you, Sheriff? What's your story?" Lucas rarely spoke of his past, but something about the stormy night and this unusual woman loosened his tongue. He told her about his family's drought-stricken Kansas farm, his father's death from a broken heart after they lost the land, his mother's return to relatives back east. "I was 21 with nothing but my horse and my father's old colt," he said. "Figured the only skills I had were riding and shooting, so I drifted, worked as a ranch hand, occasionally rode with posses when marshals needed extra guns." "And now you're sheriff," she observed. "At such a young age." Lucas shrugged. Nobody else wanted the job after what happened to Sheriff Timmons. "What happened?" "Bushwhacked by the Harding gang while escorting a prisoner to Laramie. They wanted their friend back." Lucas stared into his coffee. Timmons was 58. Had a wife, 3 grown children. All that. Gone in a moment because he wore this. He tapped the badge on his chest. Is that why you keep to yourself? Olivia asked softly. I've noticed how the townsfolk respect you, but there's a distance there. The observation, so accurate, unsettled him. A man in my position can't afford attachments. Makes him vulnerable, clouds his judgment. Sounds lonely. It's necessary, Lucas countered. Out here, sentiment gets you killed. Olivia held his gaze. Is that really what you believe? That connection, love, is a weakness. Before he could answer, a tremendous crash of thunder shook the building. The lights flickered, then went out as the lamp ran dry. In the sudden darkness, Lucas heard Olivia gasp. Stay put, he said, feeling his way to the cabinet where he kept spare lamps. Lightning illuminated the room in brief, blinding flashes as he fumbled with matches. When he finally got the new lamp lit, he turned to find Olivia standing by the window, silhouetted against the stormy night. I've never seen such a tempest, she said, her voice filled with wonder rather than fear. Lucas joined her at the window. The main street had become a river, water rushing past nearly a foot deep in places. Lightning revealed debris washing down from the higher ground. We're safe here, he assured her. Buildings on high ground, solid construction. I'm not afraid, she said, turning to face him. In the lamplight, her eyes were the color of summer skies, a startling contrast to the storm's darkness. Not with you here. Their proximity suddenly registered. They stood inches apart, her face upturned to his, the scent of rain still clinging to her hair. Lucas stepped back abruptly. You should get some rest, he said, voice gruffer than intended. You can use the cot in my quarters. I'll take the chair. I couldn't put you out of your bed. It's no trouble. I often sleep in the chair when I have prisoners to watch. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. Thank you, Sheriff Lawton. Your kindness won't be forgotten. After showing her to his sparse quarters, Lucas returned to the office and settled into his chair, listening to the storm rage. Sleep eluded him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Olivia's face, felt the strange familiarity that had nagged at him since she'd arrived. And then it hit him. The dreams. For months now, he'd been dreaming of a woman with honey blonde hair and summer sky eyes. The dreams were always the same. He would be riding across an endless prairie, and she would be waiting by a lone cottonwood tree. Her face was always in shadow until he dismounted, and then she would smile and reach for him. He always woke before their hands touched. Lucas sat upright in his chair, suddenly wide awake. It couldn't be possible. Dreams were just dreams, not premonitions. Yet the resemblance was uncanny. The same delicate features, the same determined set to her jaw. You're losing your mind, Lawton, he muttered to himself, but sleep remained impossible. Dawn broke with surprising clarity. The storm had passed, leaving behind a freshly washed world and considerable damage. Lucas was already assessing what he could see from the window when Olivia emerged from his quarters, once again dressed in her own clothes, now dry. Good morning, she said, her voice still husky with sleep. The storm has passed. Lucas nodded, distracted by how the early light caught in her hair. Roads will be bad. Might want to delay your departure. I suppose Mr. Holbrook's business can wait another day, she agreed, joining him at the window. Goodness, look at the damage. Main Street was littered with debris, broken signs, downed branches, merchandise from stores whose awnings had collapsed. Further down, Lucas could see men already at work clearing a fallen tree. I should help with the cleanup, he said. You're welcome to stay here, or if you prefer, Mrs. Halloway's boarding house should have room now. Actually, I'd like to help if I may, Olivia offered. I'm stronger than I look. Lucas raised an eyebrow. Town cleanup isn't ladies' work, Miss Walker. Her expression hardened slightly. Perhaps in Boston. But you said it yourself, Sheriff. Out here, one either adapts or perishes. I've learned to make myself useful. Something in her tone brooked no argument. Lucas found himself nodding. As you wish. Though I suspect some of the town ladies might appreciate help at the church. They'll be organizing meals for those working on repairs. Olivia considered this, then shook her head. I think I'd rather be outside, if it's all the same to you. They broke their fast with coffee and hardtack, all Lucas had on hand, before venturing out. Sweet Springs was already buzzing with activity as townsfolk assessed damage and began repairs. Lucas was immediately flagged down by the mayor to organize recovery efforts. while Olivia joined a group clearing debris from the street. Throughout the morning, Lucas found his attention repeatedly drawn to her. She worked tirelessly alongside men twice her size, hauling broken boards and sweeping mud from the boardwalks. Her blonde hair was tied back with a ribbon, her sleeves rolled up as she pitched in wherever needed. Several times he caught townsfolk giving her curious glances, clearly wondering about the stranger working so diligently. By midday, Lucas had coordinated repairs to the worst damage and helped rescue old Mrs. Peterson's chickens from a flooded coop. He was heading toward the saloon, where free lunch was being offered to recovery workers, when he spotted Olivia struggling with a heavy crate that had washed up against the general store. "Let me help with that," he offered, reaching for the crate. "I've got it," she insisted, but released her grip when he lifted it easily. "You've been working hard," he observed. Most visitors would be at the hotel complaining about the inconvenience. She wiped her brow with her forearm. "What purpose would that serve? Besides, I've always believed in earning my keep." "Well, you've certainly done that. Come on." Anderson's offering free stew at the saloon. Her eyes widened. "Is that appropriate? For a lady to enter a saloon?" Lucas grinned. "In Sweet Springs, after a storm like this? Nobody will bat an eye. Besides, Anderson keeps a respectable establishment. No working girls, just honest drinks and decent food." True to his word, the Silver Spur Saloon had transformed into an impromptu community kitchen. Women from the church auxiliary served stew and cornbread while saloon girls, fully dressed, poured coffee instead of whiskey. Lucas found them a quiet table in the corner after filling their bowls. "Quite the operation you run here, Sheriff," Olivia commented, savoring her first bite of stew. "Everyone seems to know their role." "We've weathered storms before," Lucas replied, though this one was fiercer than most. They ate in comfortable silence for a moment before Olivia spoke again. "You never answered my question last night." "Which one?" "About whether you truly believe connection is a weakness out here." Her gaze was direct, unfaltering. "That love is a luxury a man in your position can't afford." Lucas set down his spoon, considering his words carefully. "I've seen what happens when a lawman divides his attention. When he starts thinking about getting home to his family instead of focusing on the danger in front of him. It gets men killed. Or perhaps it gives them something worth fighting for," she countered. "A reason to be more careful, more determined to survive." "That's not been my experience." "And what is your experience, Sheriff?" "You're what, 25? 24, he corrected. "Precisely my point. Perhaps you haven't lived enough yet to make such definitive judgments about what a man can or cannot afford in life." Her boldness should have offended him, but instead, Lucas found himself intrigued. Few people challenged him so directly anymore, not since he'd pinned on the badge. "Perhaps," he conceded, "but I've seen enough death to know I'm not eager to leave behind a widow." Olivia studied him over her coffee cup. "So you deny yourself connection now because of what might happen later? That sounds like letting fear make your decisions for you." Before Lucas could respond, Mayor Wilkins approached their table. "Sheriff, fine work today organizing the cleanup. We should have the main thoroughfare clear by nightfall." "The townspeople did the real work," Lucas replied. "I just pointed them in the right direction." "And who might this young lady be?" The mayor turned his attention to Olivia. "Olivia Walker," she introduced herself. "I was caught in the storm while traveling to Sweet Springs on business." "Miss Walker has been helping with the cleanup," Lucas added. "Working harder than most of the men, truth be told." The mayor's eyebrows rose. "Is that so? Well, we're much obliged, Miss Walker. What business brings you to our little town?" "I have documents for Mr. Holbrook regarding the Wilson property sale." Recognition dawned on the mayor's face. "Ah, you must be Charles Walker's niece. He wrote that he would be sending a representative. We just didn't expect." "A woman," Olivia supplied with a small smile. "Such a young one." The mayor amended diplomatically. "Well, you'll find Mr. Holbrook at the bank. He reopened an hour ago, though I dare say business is slow today." After the mayor departed, Lucas regarded Olivia with new interest. "The Wilson property, that's a substantial tract of land west of town. Your uncle must be an important lawyer." "One of the most prominent in the territory," she confirmed. "Though I suspect his choice to send me rather than come himself reflects the relative importance of this particular transaction. Still, it's unusual for a young woman to conduct such business. My uncle believes in practical education. He's been training me in legal matters since I came to live with him." A shadow crossed her face. He has no children of his own, you see. Lucas nodded, sensing there was more to the story but not wanting to pry. They finished their meal and stepped back out into the bustling street, where cleanup continued. I should see Mr. Holbrook now, Olivia said. The sooner I conclude my business, the sooner I can continue helping. I'll walk you to the bank, Lucas offered, falling into step beside her. The bank was indeed open but empty of customers. Mr. Holbrook, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, looked up from his ledger as they entered. Sheriff Lawton, he greeted, then turned to Olivia. And you must be Miss Walker. Mayor Wilkins mentioned you'd arrive. Mr. Holbrook, Olivia acknowledged. I have the documents regarding the Wilson property. She removed a leather portfolio from her carpet bag. Excellent. Please, come into my office. Lucas hesitated at the door. I'll leave you to your business. Miss Walker, if you need anything, I'll be checking on the livery to see about your wagon. She nodded, a silent communication passing between them that felt oddly familiar. Lucas tipped his hat and departed, trying to shake the persistent feeling that he knew her from somewhere beyond his dreams. The day progressed with further cleanup and minor emergencies, a collapsed shed, 2 boys caught in a drainage ditch, a dispute over salvage rights to merchandise washed down from the general store. It was late afternoon before Lucas returned to the jailhouse to find Olivia waiting on the bench outside. There you are, she said, standing as he approached. Your deputy said you were out handling a situation with the Petersons. Their chicken coop floated downriver and lodged against the Miller property. Things got heated. Lucas rubbed his neck, suddenly aware of his mud-splattered appearance. Your business with Holbrook conclude successfully? It did. She hesitated. Sheriff, I'm afraid I need to impose on your hospitality for another night. Mr. Holbrook says the road to Cheyenne won't be passable until tomorrow at the earliest. The bridge at Cottonwood Creek was damaged. Lucas ignored the unexpected pleasure her words brought. No imposition. Mrs. Halloway likely has room now. Actually, I've already inquired. She's housing the Franklins after their roof collapsed. Olivia looked apologetic. I understand if it's improper for me to stay at the jailhouse again. Perhaps there's another option. Lucas considered the alternatives. The hotel was still full with cattle buyers, and most private homes were either damaged or housing displaced neighbors. The jailhouse is fine, he said finally, though folks might talk. Let them, she replied with surprising firmness. We know there's nothing improper occurring. Besides, I'm quite capable of defending my reputation when I return to Cheyenne. Her confidence was both refreshing and concerning. A young woman's reputation was fragile in frontier towns. Still, Lucas found himself nodding. As you wish. Though this time, I insist you take the cot. I'm perfectly comfortable in the chair. That evening, after a proper meal at the hotel restaurant, Lucas's treat, over Olivia's protests, they returned to the jailhouse. Lucas had rounds to make, checking on families affected by the storm, so Olivia accompanied him. He was surprised by how naturally she engaged with the townsfolk, offering comfort to children and practical assistance to harried mothers. You have a way with people, he observed as they left the Miller's home, where Olivia had spent 20 minutes entertaining their fussy infant while Mrs. Miller tended to her older children. I enjoy connecting with others, she said simply. Each person has a story worth hearing. Even cantankerous old Sheriff Timmons. Lucas joked, referencing a story he'd told her about his predecessor. Especially people like that. Often, the most difficult personalities hide the deepest wounds. She glanced at him sideways. I suspect that's true of a certain young sheriff I've recently met. Lucas felt exposed under her perceptive gaze. I'm not difficult, just practical. Practical would be recognizing that no man is an island, Sheriff. Especially not in a place like this, where survival depends on community. Her words struck closer to home than he cared to admit. They walked in silence for a while, the setting sun casting long shadows across the muddy street. May I ask you something personal? Olivia said as they neared the jailhouse. Lucas tensed but nodded. Last night, you seemed troubled by dreams. You called out in your sleep. Heat rose in Lucas's face. I apologize if I disturbed your rest. Not at all. I just wondered. She hesitated. The name you called, was it someone you lost? Lucas stopped walking. What name? Olivia, she said quietly. You called out Olivia quite clearly. The world seemed to tilt beneath Lucas's feet. He'd dreamt of the woman again last night, the familiar scene of the prairie and the cottonwood tree. But this time, When she turned to him, he'd seen her face clearly. Olivia's face. "I must have heard your name earlier and incorporated it into my dream," he said, the excuse sounding hollow even to his own ears. Olivia studied him, those summer sky eyes seeming to see right through his falsehood. Perhaps, or perhaps there's another explanation, such as, she touched his arm lightly. "I've dreamt of you too, Lucas Lawton." The admission hung between them in the gathering dusk. Lucas stared at her, searching for signs of teasing or manipulation, but found only earnest candor. "That's impossible," he said finally. "Is it? In a world this vast and mysterious?" She smiled gently. "I've dreamt of a young sheriff with kind eyes and a troubled heart since I arrived in Wyoming 3 years ago. When I saw you yesterday, I knew immediately." "Knew what?" "That you were the man from my dreams. The one standing by the jailhouse in a storm, offering shelter." Her voice lowered. "It's why I wasn't afraid to stay with you, a stranger. Because somehow, you weren't a stranger at all." Lucas ran a hand through his hair, struggling to make sense of her words. "This is madness. People don't share dreams. It must be coincidence. A coincidence that I dreamt of a young sheriff in a town I'd never visited? That you dreamt of a woman named Olivia before meeting me?" She shook her head. "Some things defy rational explanation, Lucas." The use of his given name sent a shiver through him. They had reached the jailhouse, but Lucas found himself reluctant to go inside, to break this moment of impossible connection. "Even if what you say is true," he said carefully, "what does it mean?" "I don't know," she admitted, "but I think we're meant to find out." The next morning dawned clear and cool. Lucas had spent another restless night in his chair, his mind churning with Olivia's revelation. He'd dreamt of her again, not the familiar scene by the cottonwood, but something new. They had been standing on a porch overlooking a valley, her hand in his, a sense of peace so profound it had followed him into wakefulness. When Olivia emerged from his quarters, her carpetbag packed and ready, Lucas felt a hollow sensation in his chest. The roads would be passable today. She would leave, returning to Cheyenne and her uncle's law practice, and he would remain in Sweet Springs with nothing but dreams and memories. "Mr. Holbrook sent word," she said, setting her bag by the door. "The bridge has been temporarily repaired. I can leave after breakfast." Lucas nodded, not trusting himself to speak. They walked to the hotel in silence, each lost in private thoughts. Over eggs and ham, Olivia finally broke the quiet. "I've been thinking about what happens next," she said. "After I return to Cheyenne." Lucas looked up from his plate. "What do you mean?" "This connection between us, it's not something that happens every day. I believe it deserves exploration." Her fingers drummed nervously on the tablecloth, the first sign of uncertainty he'd seen from her. "My uncle has business in Sweet Springs regularly. I could accompany him on his next visit, perhaps in a month's time." Relief flooded through Lucas, followed immediately by doubt. "Olivia, my position here, the dangers I face daily, it hasn't changed. I still believe a man wearing this badge can't afford the distraction of—" "Of what?" she prompted when he trailed off. "Of caring for someone who could be used against him," he finished. Olivia reached across the table and took his hand, her touch sending that now familiar jolt through him. "Has it occurred to you that perhaps the dreams are trying to tell you something? That your belief about being better off alone might be the very falsehood you need to overcome?" Before Lucas could respond, a commotion erupted outside the hotel. Shouts and the sound of running feet drew his attention. He was on his feet instantly, moving toward the door. "Stay here," he instructed Olivia, but she was already following him. They emerged onto the hotel porch to find the street in chaos. A group of armed men on horseback had ridden into town, firing shots into the air and sending townspeople scrambling for cover. "It's the Harding gang," someone shouted. Lucas's blood ran cold. The same outlaws who had killed Sheriff Timmons had returned to Sweet Springs. "Get back inside," he ordered Olivia, drawing his Colt. "Lucas, now," he said firmly, his eyes never leaving the approaching riders. This time she obeyed, retreating into the hotel lobby. Lucas stepped into the street, his badge catching the morning sun. "That's far enough," he called, his voice carrying down the muddy thoroughfare. The riders slowed, 5 men with hard eyes and harder expressions. Their leader, a scar-faced man Lucas recognized from wanted posters as Jeb Harding, urged his mount forward. "Well now, if it ain't the boy sheriff," Harding drawled. Heard Sweet Springs got itself a new lawman after we dealt with old Timmons. State your business and move on, Harding, Lucas replied evenly. You're not welcome here. Harding laughed, a sound like rocks in a tin can. That ain't no way to greet visitors, boy. We just come to replenish our supplies. Storm hit us hard up in the hills. There are towns that would welcome your kind north of here. Sweet Springs isn't one of them. Lucas was acutely aware of his vulnerability, alone in the street against 5 armed men. His deputy was likely still checking storm damage at the south end of town. From the corner of his eye, he could see townspeople watching from doorways and windows. No help would come from that quarter. These were shopkeepers and farmers, not gunfighters. You got sand, boy, I'll give you that, Harding said, his amusement fading. But you're outnumbered. We're going to get what we came for, and you're going to step aside if you know what's good for you. Lucas held his ground. The only thing waiting for you here is a cell. Or a pine box if you prefer. Your choice. Harding's hand dropped to his holster. I was hoping you'd say something foolish like that. Time seemed to slow. Lucas knew he couldn't outdraw all 5 men, but he might take Harding with him. His mind flashed to Olivia, to the dreams they'd shared, to the future they might never explore. For the first time, he felt the full weight of what he stood to lose. Not just his life, but the possibility of connection, of love. The moment stretched, taut as a bowstring. Then, unexpectedly, a rifle shot cracked through the air. One of Harding's men jerked in his saddle, clutching his shoulder. Next one goes between your eyes, Harding, called a familiar voice. Lucas didn't dare look away from the outlaws, but he recognized Deputy Marshal Forrest's voice. From the sounds of boots on boardwalks, others had joined him. Town surrounded, Harding, Forrest continued. Drop your weapons. Harding's eyes darted around, assessing the changed situation. His face twisted with rage, but Lucas could see the calculation behind his eyes. This ain't over, boy, he spat, slowly raising his hands. Not by a long shot. Actually, it is, Lucas replied. You're under arrest for the murder of Sheriff Timmons and a long list of other charges that'll see you dancing at the end of a rope. The arrest proceeded with surprising smoothness once Harding's men realized their predicament. Marshal Forrest had indeed brought reinforcements, a posse of 6 experienced lawmen who had been tracking the gang for weeks. Got word they were headed this way, Forrest explained later, as they secured the prisoners in the jailhouse. Rode hard through the night to intercept them. Looks like we arrived just in time. Your timing was impeccable, Lucas agreed, the adrenaline of the confrontation still coursing through him. Only after the prisoners were secured did Lucas seek out Olivia. He found her at the hotel, pale but composed, surrounded by townsfolk who were recounting the showdown with elaborate embellishments. Sheriff Lawton stood like David against Goliath, Mrs. Peterson was saying. Never flinched once, even with 5 guns aimed at his heart. For guns, Lucas corrected as he approached. And they weren't all aimed at me. Yet, the crowd parted, and Olivia rose from her chair. Without hesitation, she crossed to him and placed a hand on his chest, right over his heart. You're unharmed? She asked, her eyes searching his face. Not a scratch, he assured her. Relief washed over her features, followed by something sterner. You were prepared to die. It wasn't a question, but Lucas answered anyway. It's the job. Is it worth it? Risking everything for people who hide behind doors while you face down killers alone? The question caught him off guard, especially coming from her. Someone has to stand between good folks and those who'd prey on them. Yes, she agreed. But that someone doesn't have to stand alone. Her words echoed in Lucas's mind throughout the day as he processed the Harding gang and prepared for their transfer to the territorial capital. Marshal Forrest had offered to take the prisoners off his hands, but Lucas insisted on seeing the job through. These men had killed his predecessor. He would ensure they faced justice. By the time evening fell, arrangements had been made for Lucas and Deputy Turner to escort the prisoners to Cheyenne the following day, accompanied by Marshal Forrest's posse. It would be a 3-day journey if all went well. I suppose this means we're traveling the same direction, Olivia observed when he told her of his plans over a late supper at the hotel. It does, Lucas agreed. Though I'd prefer you waited for another escort. Prisoner transports can be dangerous. She smiled. With 7 lawmen guarding 5 prisoners? I think I'll be quite safe. Lucas couldn't argue with her logic, though the thought of Olivia witnessing the grimmer aspects of his job troubled him. Still, The prospect of 3 more days in her company lightened his mood considerably. They departed at dawn, the prisoners securely chained in a reinforced wagon, lawmen riding escort around them. Olivia followed in her own wagon, keeping pace despite the still muddy roads. Lucas found himself constantly checking on her, earning knowing looks from Marshal Forrest. "Pretty little thing," the marshal commented during a rest stop. "Got spirit too. Saw her helping during the cleanup. Not many city ladies would dirty their hands like that." "She's different," Lucas acknowledged, unsure how else to describe Olivia. Forrest studied him for a moment. "You know, Lawton, wearing that badge doesn't mean giving up on having a life. Plenty of sheriffs and marshals have wives, families. And plenty die and leave those families destitute," Lucas countered. "Or worse, get them killed because some outlaw decides to settle a score." "That's true enough," Forrest conceded. "But is the alternative any better? Dying alone with nothing but a tin star to show for your life." The journey proceeded without incident, each night spent at way stations where the prisoners could be secured. Lucas found moments to speak privately with Olivia during these stops, their conversations deepening as they shared more of their histories, their hopes. On the second night, sitting on the porch of a remote stage stop while the others slept, Olivia confided the full story of her arrival in Wyoming. "My uncle didn't bring me west just for my health," she admitted. "After my parents died, I was lost. More than grieving, I was angry at the world, at God, at everyone who still had their family intact. I became reckless, defiant." Lucas tried to imagine this composed, self-assured woman as a rebellious girl and found it difficult. "What changed?" he asked. "The dreams began," she said simply, "about 6 months after I arrived in Cheyenne. At first, they were just flashes, a young man with kind eyes, a storm, a feeling of safety I hadn't experienced since before my parents died." She looked out at the star-filled sky. "They became more detailed over time. I saw a jailhouse, a badge, a moment of standing together against something frightening. When I told my uncle about them, he thought I was creating an imaginary protector to cope with my grief." "But you believe they were more than that," Lucas guessed. Olivia nodded. "I knew they were showing me something real, something important. When Uncle Charles mentioned sending someone to Sweet Springs for the Wilson property matter, I volunteered immediately. I didn't tell him why. And now, what does this all mean to you?" She turned to face him fully, her expression earnest in the lamplight. "I believe we're being given a chance, Lucas. A chance to break the isolation we've both built around ourselves. You with your badge, me with my grief. A chance to trust that connection isn't weakness but strength." Her words resonated with something deep within him, challenging beliefs he'd held as absolute truth since taking the sheriff's position. "Even if you're right," he said slowly, "my job remains dangerous. That reality doesn't change." "No," she agreed, "but your approach to it might. There's a difference between calculated risks taken by a man with something to live for and the recklessness of someone who believes he has nothing to lose." The insight struck Lucas like a physical blow. Had he been reckless because, deep down, he believed his life held little value beyond his duty? Had his isolation been not prudence, but a form of surrender? They reached Cheyenne on the afternoon of the third day. The territorial marshal's office took custody of the prisoners, and Lucas found himself standing awkwardly with Olivia outside her uncle's impressive home. "Will you come inside?" she asked. "Uncle Charles would love to meet you." Lucas glanced down at his trail-worn appearance. "Perhaps another time, when I'm more presentable." Disappointment flickered across her face, but she nodded. "When will you return to Sweet Springs?" "Day after tomorrow, most likely. Need to file reports, testify to the circumstances of the arrest." "Then we have tomorrow," she said, a determined set to her jaw. "I'll show you Cheyenne, the parts visitors rarely see." Before he could formulate a reason to decline, she had extracted his promise to meet her the following morning. As Lucas walked away, heading toward the modest boarding house where he and Deputy Turner would stay, he felt both anticipation and trepidation about what tomorrow might bring. True to her word, Olivia appeared at his boarding house the next morning, dressed in a simple but elegant blue dress that matched her eyes. She led him through Cheyenne with the confidence of a long-time resident, showing him hidden gardens, architectural curiosities, and finally, a spectacular view of the surrounding plains from a hillside just outside town. "This is where I come to think," she said as they stood side by side. the breeze playing with loose strands of her honey-blonde hair. To remember that the world is larger than my troubles. Lucas understood the sentiment. He'd found similar solace in the open plains around Sweet Springs, though he'd never articulated it so clearly. Olivia, he began, uncertain how to express the tumult of his feelings. These past few days, meeting you, these shared dreams, it's all happened so quickly. Too quickly, she asked, a vulnerable note in her voice he hadn't heard before. No, he said firmly. But I return to Sweet Springs tomorrow, and you have your life here with your uncle. I don't know what happens next. She turned to face him, her expression resolute. I do. I'm coming to Sweet Springs in 1 month's time. My uncle has already agreed. He needs to finalize the Wilson property transfer anyway. We'll have time then to better understand this connection between us. And if we discover these shared dreams were just an extraordinary coincidence. A smile touched her lips. Do you truly believe that's all they were? Lucas shook his head slowly. No, I don't. Neither do I. She stepped closer, her nearness making his heart race. I believe they were guiding us toward each other for a reason. Perhaps to help us both heal from the past. Perhaps to show us a future neither of us imagined possible. A future where a sheriff allows himself to care for someone, despite the risks? Lucas suggested. And where a grief-stricken girl becomes a woman capable of loving without fear of loss. Olivia added softly. The moment hung between them, charged with possibility. Lucas hesitated, then gently cupped her cheek with his hand. When she leaned into his touch rather than pulling away, he lowered his head and kissed her. A brief, tender meeting of lips that seemed to seal a promise. 1 month, he said when they parted. It seems both an eternity and no time at all. We'll write, she assured him. Every week. And we'll dream. The month that followed was the strangest of Lucas's life. By day, he resumed his duties as sheriff with a new perspective. The townsfolk noticed the change in him. A softening around the edges, a greater willingness to engage in community life rather than remaining aloof. He began training a second deputy, recognizing that his previous solitary approach had left Sweet Springs vulnerable. By night, he dreamt of Olivia. Sometimes they were the familiar scenes by the cottonwood tree, but increasingly, the dreams showed new vistas, a homestead on a rise overlooking Sweet Springs, children playing in a sunlit yard, Olivia by his side as they grew older together. They exchanged letters weekly as promised, each more revealing than the last. Lucas confided his growing certainty that his isolation had been born not of practical necessity, but of fear. Fear of loss, fear of inadequacy, fear of the vulnerability that love demanded. Olivia shared her own journey from rebellious grief to purposeful living, and how the dreams of him had given her hope when nothing else could. When news came that Charles Walker would arrive in Sweet Springs the following week to finalize the Wilson property sale, Lucas found himself counting the hours. He had the jailhouse thoroughly cleaned, his quarters made presentable, and even purchased a new shirt for the occasion. The day of their arrival, Lucas stood on the platform at the newly completed train station, his heart hammering against his ribs. When Olivia descended from the train, more beautiful than his memory had preserved, he knew with absolute certainty that the dreams had been right all along. They were meant to find each other, to heal each other, to build something together that neither could create alone. Sheriff Lawton. She greeted him formally, eyes dancing with barely contained joy. How wonderful to see Sweet Springs recovered from the storm. Miss Walker, he replied with equal formality, though his smile betrayed him. Welcome back. Charles Walker, a distinguished gentleman with graying temples and Olivia's intelligent eyes, observed their exchange with evident curiosity. After introductions were made and luggage collected, Lucas escorted them to the hotel where rooms had been arranged. I understand you were instrumental in capturing the Harding gang, Walker commented as they walked. The territorial governor mentioned it when we dined last week. Said a young sheriff stood them down single-handedly in the middle of the street. Lucas shook his head. That version grows more exaggerated with each telling. Marshal Forrest and his men deserve most of the credit. But you did stand alone initially, Olivia pointed out. I witnessed it myself. As did half the town, Lucas acknowledged. Though most were peering through windows rather than standing alongside me. As any sensible person would, Walker said. Which makes your actions all the more remarkable, Sheriff. Lucas felt uncomfortable with the praise, but recognized an opportunity to impress Olivia's guardian. "Just doing my duty, sir." After settling the Walkers at the hotel, Lucas returned to the jailhouse, his mind racing with plans for the coming days. He wanted to show Olivia everything. The improvements to the town since her last visit, the wildflower meadows beyond the creek, the spot where he'd begun planning a house of his own on a parcel adjacent to the Wilson property. That evening, they dined together at the hotel restaurant, Charles Walker dominating the conversation with tales of territorial politics and legal cases. Lucas found himself grateful for the chance to observe Olivia's interactions with her uncle, the easy affection between them, the shared references to their life in Cheyenne, the way she gently redirected him when he became too technical in his explanations. As the meal concluded, Walker announced his intention to retire early. "The journey has tired me more than I expected. Age catching up with me, I suppose." He eyed Lucas and Olivia speculatively. "Perhaps you young people might enjoy a stroll in the evening air? Sweet Springs looks quite charming in the twilight." The suggestion, clearly deliberate, brought a flush to Olivia's cheeks. "Uncle Charles, really?" Walker waved away her protest. "Sheriff Lawton is a man of integrity, and you're hardly a child needing chaperoning, my dear. Just be back at a reasonable hour." With that blessing, Lucas and Olivia found themselves walking along the main street of Sweet Springs, the setting sun painting the western sky in brilliant orange and gold. "Your uncle seems very understanding," Lucas observed. Olivia smiled. "He knows about the dreams. I told him everything after our last meeting. He was skeptical at first, but..." She hesitated. "I think he recognizes something in the way we look at each other. Something familiar. Oh, he loved my aunt very deeply. She died young, before I came to live with them. He never remarried, never even courted another woman." Her voice softened. "He told me once that when you find the person who makes your soul recognize its counterpart, you don't question it. You hold on with both hands." Lucas led her toward the creek that ran behind the town, to a small footbridge where they could watch the last light fade from the sky. Standing beside her in the gathering dusk, he felt a certainty he'd never experienced before. "I've been thinking about what happens after your visit," he said. "After you return to Cheyenne." Olivia turned to him, her expression serious. "As have I. I don't want to go back to letters and dreams, Olivia. Not when I know what it's like to have you here, in the flesh, beside me." Lucas took her hands in his. "I want to court you properly, to build a life together, if you'll have me." "Lucas," she began, but he pressed on, needing to say everything he'd rehearsed. "I know it's fast. I know we've had barely any time together in person, but I also know that what's between us is real and rare. The dreams brought us together for a reason, and I don't intend to waste the gift we've been given." "Are you asking me to marry you?" Olivia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not yet," Lucas replied honestly. "That would be too soon, even with our unusual circumstances. I'm asking for the chance to earn the right to ask that question in the future. I'm asking if you'd consider making Sweet Springs your home, finding work here perhaps, allowing us the time to know each other in the waking world as thoroughly as we do in our dreams." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears in the fading light. "You've thought this through." "I have. There's a teaching position opening at the school in the fall. Your uncle mentioned you studied at a women's college back east before coming to Wyoming. Or perhaps you could apprentice with Judge Parker. He's mentioned needing assistance with his caseload." A smile broke across her face. "You've really thought this through." "I've had a month to consider little else," Lucas admitted. "What do you say, Olivia? Will you stay? Or at least consider it?" Instead of answering immediately, she stepped closer and raised her hand to his face, tracing the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "Do you remember what I said that night at the jailhouse? About connection not being weakness but strength?" Lucas nodded, turning his face slightly to kiss her palm. "I believed it then," she continued. "I believe it even more now, having seen how you've changed in the past month. Your letters showed me a man opening himself to possibilities, not just duty. A man recognizing that standing alone isn't always the strongest position." "You've changed me," he said simply. "No," she corrected. "You've changed yourself. I was just the catalyst." She took a deep breath. "And you've changed me too. Shown me that loving again doesn't diminish what I lost. It honors it by proving I still have the courage to risk my heart." Lucas waited, hardly daring to breathe. "Yes," Olivia said finally. "I will stay in Sweet Springs." "Not immediately," I need to make arrangements in Cheyenne, conclude my responsibilities there. But by summer's end, I could return. For good. Joy surged through Lucas, so powerful it momentarily robbed him of speech. When he found his voice again, it was husky with emotion. I'll be counting the days. As will I, she promised. And in the meantime, we'll have our dreams. The remainder of the Walkers' visit passed in a whirlwind of activity. Charles concluded his business with the bank regarding the Wilson property, a transaction Lucas now understood had been orchestrated by something beyond coincidence. In the evenings, Lucas and Olivia walked together, sharing their histories in greater detail, discovering the myriad ways their lives had been preparing them for each other. On their final night before returning to Cheyenne, Olivia convinced her uncle to join them for dinner at Lucas's modest home behind the jailhouse. Lucas had spent days preparing, cleaning, and rearranging to make the small space presentable. He'd even enlisted Mrs. Peterson's help with preparing a proper meal: roast beef, potatoes, and apple pie for dessert. You've created a comfortable home here, Sheriff, Walker commented as they settled around the small table. It serves its purpose, Lucas replied. Though I've recently purchased land on the western edge of town. Hope to build something more substantial there eventually. Walker's eyebrows rose. Is that so? Planning for the future, are we? Charles, Olivia admonished, but her eyes sparkled with pleasure at Lucas's revelation. A man in my position should have roots in the community he serves, Lucas said diplomatically. Something more permanent than quarters attached to the jailhouse. Indeed. Walker cut into his roast beef, a knowing smile playing at the corners of his mouth. And speaking of permanent arrangements, Olivia tells me she's considering relocating to Sweet Springs by summer's end. If a suitable position can be arranged, Olivia clarified, either teaching or legal work. Judge Parker would be fortunate to have you, Lucas said. He's been complaining about the paperwork backlog for months. Walker set down his fork and regarded them both with a suddenly serious expression. Before this proceeds any further, I feel compelled to speak plainly. Sheriff, your interest in my niece is obvious, as is hers in you. While I find nothing objectionable in your character or position, the speed of this attachment concerns me. Lucas straightened in his chair. I understand, sir. It may seem hasty from the outside. Uncle Charles, Olivia began, but Walker held up a hand. Let me finish, my dear. I've observed you both closely during this visit. There is something unusual in your connection. Something that reminds me of what I shared with your aunt, though it took us years to develop what you two seem to have found in weeks. He turned his attention back to Lucas. I don't pretend to understand these shared dreams Olivia has described. They fall outside my rational legal mind's capacity to explain. But I cannot deny their impact, nor the genuine nature of what I see between you. Lucas remained silent, waiting. What are your intentions toward my niece, Sheriff Lawton? Walker asked directly. I would have your word as plainly as possible. To court her honorably, Lucas replied without hesitation. To build a foundation for a shared life, if she'll have me. To protect and cherish her for as long as I live. Walker nodded slowly. And the dangers of your position? Olivia mentioned your previous concerns about a lawman's life being incompatible with family. I've reconsidered that position, Lucas said. While the risks remain real, I believe the greater risk would be denying ourselves happiness out of fear. Besides, I'm working to make Sweet Springs safer, training deputies, building community support. My goal is a town where the sheriff's role becomes increasingly administrative rather than confrontational. A worthy ambition, Walker conceded. He looked at Olivia. And you, my dear? Are you prepared for the challenges of being a lawman's wife, should matters progress to that point? Olivia met her uncle's gaze steadily. I've seen the reality of it firsthand during the confrontation with the Harding gang. I harbor no illusions about the dangers. But I also believe Lucas and I are stronger together than apart. Walker was silent for a long moment, considering their words. Finally, he smiled. Then you have my blessing to proceed with this courtship. Though I would ask that you exercise patience and propriety. Allow yourselves time in the waking world before making permanent commitments. We intend to, Lucas assured him. Olivia will return in late summer. We'll take proper time to court before any formal engagement. Good, Walker said, resuming his meal. Now, tell me about this land you've purchased. What sort of house do you envision building there? As Lucas described his plans for a modest but comfortable home with room to expand, he caught Olivia's eye across the table. The joy and certainty he saw reflected there matched his own. The path ahead was clear at last. The morning of the Walkers' departure arrived with bittersweetness. Lucas accompanied them to the station, helping with luggage and finding it increasingly difficult to maintain a proper public demeanor as the moment of separation approached. 2 months, Olivia said quietly as they stood on the platform. 8 weeks and I'll return. I'll have the teaching position arranged by then, Lucas promised. And I've spoken with Judge Parker. He's eager to meet you when you return. The train whistle blew, signaling the final boarding call. Charles Walker discreetly moved down the platform, giving them a moment of privacy. I've never been good at goodbyes, Lucas admitted. Olivia smiled up at him. Then don't say goodbye. Say until we meet again, in our dreams, and in Sweet Springs when summer ends. Lucas took her hand, propriety be damned, and raised it to his lips. Until we meet again, Olivia Walker. Until then, Sheriff Lawton, she replied, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Keep Sweet Springs safe for my return. He helped her board the train, tipped his hat to Charles Walker, and stood watching as the engine built steam and pulled slowly from the station. Even as the train disappeared into the distance, Lucas felt none of the hollowness he'd expected. In its place was anticipation, purpose, and a certainty that transcended separation. The 8 weeks that followed transformed both Lucas and Sweet Springs. With energy he hadn't known he possessed, Lucas threw himself into preparations for Olivia's return. He oversaw the completion of the new schoolhouse where she would teach, worked with Judge Parker to create a proper office space for her legal assistants, and began construction on his house overlooking the valley. The townsfolk, initially surprised by their young sheriff's sudden involvement in community matters, soon embraced the change. Lucas found himself invited to Sunday dinners, consulted on matters beyond law enforcement, included in the daily life of Sweet Springs in ways he'd previously avoided. Never seen you so fired up, Deputy Turner commented one afternoon as they patrolled the quiet streets. That Walker girl really got under your skin, didn't she? She helped me see some things more clearly, Lucas replied, unwilling to share the full truth of their connection. Turner nodded knowingly. Well, town's better for it. Folks feel safer knowing their sheriff sees himself as part of the community, not just its protector. The observation stuck with Lucas, reinforcing what Olivia had helped him understand. That connection wasn't weakness but strength, that being part of something larger than himself made him more effective, not less. Their letters continued, each more open than the last. Olivia wrote of her preparations to leave Cheyenne, the cases she was concluding for her uncle, her excitement about teaching in Sweet Springs. Lucas shared the progress on his house, the changing dynamics in town, and increasingly, his dreams for their future together. And at night, the shared dreams continued, more vivid now, more specific. They walked through the house he was building, planned gardens together, sat on the porch watching sunset over the valley. In one recurring dream, they stood beneath the cottonwood tree where their dream connection had begun, but now surrounded by laughing children with Olivia's blue eyes and Lucas's determined jaw. When August finally arrived, Lucas could barely contain his anticipation. The house wasn't complete, but the main rooms were finished, enough to show Olivia when she arrived. The school board had officially offered her the teaching position, and Judge Parker had a desk waiting in his office. On the day of her arrival, Lucas paced the station platform, earning amused glances from townspeople who had never seen their steady sheriff so obviously anxious. When the train finally appeared on the horizon, he forced himself to stand still, hat in hand, heart thundering in his chest. The train hissed to a stop, passengers began to disembark, and then, there she was. Olivia stepped onto the platform, eyes immediately finding his in the crowd. For a suspended moment, they simply looked at each other, drinking in the sight after 2 months apart. Then she was moving toward him, he toward her, propriety forgotten as they met in the middle of the platform. Lucas took her hands in his, resisting the impulse to sweep her into his arms. "Welcome home," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Home," she repeated, the word filled with promise. "Yes, I believe it is." In that moment, standing on the sun-drenched platform of Sweet Springs Station, Lucas Lawton finally understood the truth the dreams had been showing him all along. Home wasn't a place, it was a person. His person, the woman from his dreams who had become his waking reality, his future, his heart. 3 months later, as autumn painted the surrounding hills in gold and crimson, Lucas and Olivia stood beneath the cottonwood tree from their dreams. Before them, Judge Parker conducted a ceremony witnessed by the entire town of Sweet Springs. Charles Walker stood proudly at Olivia's side, ready to give away the niece who had become a daughter to him. "I never believed in fates or destinies," Lucas said when it came time for their vows. "Until dreams of you haunted my nights and changed my days. You showed me that a man isn't weaker for loving, but stronger. That a life shared multiplies joy and divides sorrow. I promise to stand beside you, not just in dreams, but in all our waking moments, through whatever storms may come." Tears glistened in Olivia's eyes as she spoke her own vows. "I came west broken, believing love was something I'd lost forever with my parents. Then you appeared in my dreams, first as a shadow, then as hope, finally as truth. You taught me that the heart doesn't heal by closing itself off, but by opening to new possibility. I promise to walk with you along whatever path life presents, to build our home in each other, to face each sunrise and sunset at your side." As Judge Parker pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas kissed his bride beneath the cottonwood tree that had witnessed their first dream meeting. The cheers of the townspeople washed over them, no longer strangers, but family, no longer observer and observed, but integral parts of the community they served. That night, in their new home overlooking the valley, Lucas held Olivia close as they watched moonlight silvering the landscape below. "Do you think the dreams will continue now that we're together?" she wondered. Lucas considered this, his hand tracing lazy circles on her back. "I'm not sure it matters anymore. We found what they were guiding us toward. Each other, this life we're building." "Still," Olivia mused, "I've grown rather fond of meeting you under that cottonwood tree." "As have I," Lucas admitted with a smile. "But I find I prefer this reality, being able to hold you, to build a life beyond what even dreams could show us." She turned in his arms to face him, her expression thoughtful. "The dreams were just the beginning, weren't they? A map to guide us to each other. But the journey itself, that's ours to create. Together," Lucas agreed, kissing her softly. "One day at a time." That night, they both dreamt of the cottonwood tree one final time. But now the scene expanded, showing not just the tree but the house on the hill, the town in the valley, children playing in sunlit fields, and themselves growing older together surrounded by the community they loved. When they woke, they shared the dream without surprise, understanding it not as prophecy, but as possibility. The future they would build together, day by day, dream by dream, love by love. In the years that followed, as Sweet Springs grew and prospered, townsfolk would often remark on the particular bond between their sheriff and the schoolteacher who had arrived during that long-ago storm. Some said it was love at first sight. Others claimed they had known each other in a previous life. Only Lucas and Olivia knew the truth, that sometimes, when the heart recognizes its counterpart, not even the boundaries between dreams and waking life can keep them apart. That sometimes, a storm brings not destruction but the very shelter you've been seeking all along.